Well, we have global warming going on. We have fuel prices going
Yes,
up.
yes,
We
yes.
can't afford these houses. And that's a huge part of the small house movement, are just people looking at their utility bills and saying, I need a way out.
That's right.
I don't want to pay this utility bill anymore.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. My guest today is looking at the world in small lenses, small houses, but in a very big way, in a big-hearted way. My guest is Shay Salomon, who's the author of a new book called Little House on a Small Planet. Thanks for joining me.
It's nice to be here.
Tell us just to start, how did you get into, you're on a book tour promoting this, how did you get into dealing with little houses?
Well, I've been in the building trades for maybe about 12 years or 15 years, and I was trying to figure out in the residential realm, people building their own house or buying a house or paying for someone to build them a house, who's really happy? Which families really had a pleasant time building, and which ones really fell apart? And something that I noticed that was common to people who seemed to be pretty happy, families or individuals, couples, was that usually they built very small, the people who were the happiest. Not always, but there were certain common characteristics, and usually it was scaled down.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that brought happiness? I'm sure that was part of the question that led to your quest here.
Right. There's a number of reasons why people are happier when they just have enough. And I think one of the reasons is obviously the financial reason, that some people get sort of trapped into a pattern where they take out a mortgage that's really beyond their means. Or even if it's not exactly beyond their means according to the bank, it still requires them maybe to stay in a job that they don't like or some other situation. Whereas some other people are building very small and they're figuring out they have a long-term plan for how they can get out of their mortgage. So that's one, really big point as to why people are happier in small houses. There's also just less maintenance cost. There's less utility costs. If they're building it themselves, they're more likely to finish it. And the whole process finishes. In fact, in some cases, people have built the guest house first. They thought they were just going to build, a guest house and then the big house. Then they find out the guest house was fine, and they lived in it. They've been living in it for 10 years. And
Why do you think people America's moved towards building bigger and bigger houses, or builders have gone towards that? Why?
There's a number of reasons. One is that the technology permits it. We have really advanced technology, so we can clear a forest in a few minutes now. And we have supply lines of all kinds of materials that we maybe didn't have so much of 100 years ago. There's also a financial motivation that banks would like to increase the value of houses because they also want the value of land to be high. And if the value of land far exceeds the value of the house, it's a little bit of a problem in terms of a banker's way of looking at things. So that's just the situation that we find ourselves in, how we're valuing things, and the control that kind of banks have over that situation.
Rather than choosing your own house, you have to deal with what they want.
Yeah, and many people say it's also that people are keeping up with the Joneses, right? That everyone else is building something large. So people say, you deserve it, build more.
Yes.
We have a tradition, one of our traditions, not our whole story, but part of our American story is bigger is always better.
Yes. So
Expand,
go out the frontier, go to the bigger house.
Manifest destiny.
And it's part of that, perhaps, that sign of success. You have the big house.
Yeah, or as one woman said, small houses are for small people. People who want to live large must have a large house. So people often equate themselves with their house.
Well, that gets, of course, into the inner and the outer dimensions, because some of the most humble people we know, I'm thinking of someone like Gandhi, or we met some monks in Thailand who live in tiny places, but you know that who their souls are very big. And so I think, I sometimes think about that in America, that kind of hunger for an inner meaning of a world that has meaning to them, maybe then the outside doesn't have to fill in so much on the
That's
material
right,
level.
that inner feeling of worth, so that your outer display of worth doesn't have to be so great, because you know that you have this inner worth.
Right, right.
And certainly many people who choose to build small, and some people who build relatively moderately or large, they have that inner sense of worth, so they're happier during the process. The house is not what displays who they are.
Yes, yes.
You know, it shows something about them, but it's not who they are.
So you've been on your book tour here for several weeks. What are you finding in terms of people's response to the idea of small houses? I would add that you're one of the co-founders of the Small House Society, right? So talk about that movement you see.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a number of different groups that are very interested in the movement. One is people who for some time have lived in very little space and have liked it, but have thought maybe something was wrong with them.
Yes.
You know, like a woman who came up after a talk and said, "I'm so glad I came to this talk. I thought my daughter was a failure because she's a professional, but she's sharing a house in the Bay Area with other people." Then I visited them and they were so happy, right? She said, in your book and this movement really shows that you can be very happy living closer with each other, because of course the book and the movement is not just about living in small spaces necessarily, but about living maybe more densely, sharing space. We say giving up your loneliness.
Giving up your loneliness. Well, we're going to pause for a minute. Maybe we've got an epidemic of loneliness in America.
Seems like
and
it.
Our suburban separated little houses and our little separated cars and so on. We don't have the town centers we used to. We have the anonymous shopping malls. I mean,
we spend so much time alone, or with just maybe one other person.
Or with our computers.
Or with our computers.
Televisions or whatever.
Yeah, with a very small social network. And that's hard on most people. For most of human history, we haven't lived like that.
Yeah.
And it's hard to have 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 square feet between you and the next person, or that you maybe share with just one other person. From a psychological standpoint, that can be very hard on some people.
We're made that way.
It's also ecologically problematic, because it means you have to, if you're spread out that much, you have to drive to get to social events. And with all the, with oil depletion and the cost of fuel going up,
I think we're going to find, I think
people.
that you're sort of at the beginning of many people discovering that there are benefits to, it will come out, I mean, it'll be higher prices, and of course climate change is being affected, but there's some positive things to look at here in terms of connecting with each other and having a social network a glue.
Absolutely. Older people often struggle with being in a large house, loving their house, having memories in their house.
Sure.
And, we'd never say you have to leave your house and scale down. One way to stay in your house but be less lonely is to invite other people to live with you. Some people don't want to do that. Some people want to live alone in their house. But there's a certain group of people who've said, no, I think I'm either going to move into something smaller and are loving it, or they're letting people come into their house and loving it.
Which could be very comforting. Yeah, I realize people have different temperaments. I want to go back to, I'm not sure that we covered all the thoughts you had about the kinds of people that are being attracted to the small house movement.
Okay, so there's those people who are already doing it and are just happy to know that they're part of a movement. Then there are people who've felt lonely. People who are, for instance, sort of, maybe we call them yoga moms. They're people who they're a little bit aware of, and they're thinking quite a bit about what's happening environmentally and politically in the world. And they're realizing that something's off. And so they're very interested in the ideas. They may be not quite there yet. One group of these, usually women, have found that even though they have very huge houses, they don't feel like they have a room of their own. So they're interested often in having a very tiny, like maybe 8x8 space that's in their backyard that they go to as a meditation space. And sometimes after their practice of being in that meditation space, they realize, they kind of wish their whole house were more like that.
I have a friend who does massage, and she's done that. She has mommy's little house. I mean, she has just one child, but this little, it's probably 8 by 10 room that she knows that she can just close the world out and all the demands and all the stimuli. And I would imagine that that's very appealing for people who have busy lives with children, with chauffeuring, with shopping, all their activities.
To have a little place where they can go. Some people, of course, use their car that way.
Sure.
But
sure.
you know, it's very nice to have a solid place. Some people use the forest or a park. They have a place where they always go back to, or a cafe. So there's a number of ways you can do this, but that's certainly one group that's attracted to having some small place in the world that's just for them. There's also a group of people who are very strong environmentalists, who have sort of done the math and they figured out that environmentally the best way is to live in very little space per person.
Well, it certainly uses less energy, fewer materials, right? And less energy to both build it and also to keep it maintained, to heat, to use electricity and so on in smaller spaces.
Absolutely.
I was interested in your book at the facts, the comparison between a very small house and an apartment, say even in New York City. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, an apartment in New York City uses the least energy per capita. New Yorkers, Manhattanites, specifically Manhattanites, use the least energy per capita in the United States, significantly less
That's
than other
a lot.
Americans.
You said something like 1/8.
1/8 is one of the calculations. 1/5 to 1/8 are the different
Even
calculations.
Even that's a lot.
It's a
now,
lot
partly
less.
they're using public transportation.
Absolutely.
That's big.
They're sharing walls, so the heat the heat loss is less, and they have small apartments, so they don't have as much space to heat. They don't necessarily have efficient apartments, and they don't have necessarily such good weather. Yet they're using a lot less energy than the rest of us are because they're living so densely.
It's just all those warm bodies all close together.
I think so. They're warming each other up. There's hot summers too.
So, we've touched on some of the economic factors. I'm trying to think of all of them. Some of it, the notion of people being freed of their mortgages. Let's talk a little bit. You talked about the banks being a part of why we are building bigger houses. We're also at a time now where the housing bubble seems to have flattened out. So
yeah, we're in a difficult time because our main economic engine, particularly for the last 8 years, has been construction. In a way, for the last 60 years, construction has been one of the main engines in all of our communities.
In America here particularly.
So it's what we turn on. The government guarantees loans through the banks to encourage house construction. And it's been a good way to keep people employed. However, we have such a high vacancy rate now. We have over about 10.5 million vacant houses right now.
10.5 in the whole United States?
In the United States. That doesn't even count abandoned houses that are in disrepair. But we have 10.5 million units of housing that are in good repair and that taxes are being paid on. So in many cities we have a vacancy rate in apartments of 15%, which is quite high compared to other countries. We've produced a lot. We're very good at producing housing. We have a large immigrant workforce that produces those houses in general, as well as native-born people. We do it pretty well in terms of, particularly in terms of quantity. And also we have some very high quality houses. We love building houses. A lot of our language, day to day, is very positive towards building.
Yes.
You know, build a new tomorrow and so forth. In other languages, you don't hear that so much, that much focus on
Interesting, because
building.
that's part of that whole notion of growth is good, building is good, creating, I mean, it fits, which is getting tougher on a small planet, which actually gets me to talking to you. Where did this name come from?
Well, it comes from 2 different books that really influenced me. One was, of course, Little House on the Prairie, which many of us read as children. I just love those. Yeah, these Happy Golden Years and I can't remember, Small House in the Big Woods.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a whole bunch of beautiful, beautiful books. My father's parents were homesteaders, and he was born in a small log cabin. There's a long history of Americans really working hard, living in very little space, creating a sort of a community, a lot of fun and family, and
Yes.
not that it wasn't a struggle also, and not that there weren't very difficult sides to that, but there's that, we had that background as Americans as well. So the bigger is better is not the only,
Yes.
the only,
only story that we're listening to.
absolutely. There's also the book Diet for a Small Planet, which was by Frances Moore Lappé, who's written the introduction, or rather the foreword to this book. And that influenced me because when my mother read it, she cut way down on how much meat we were eating at home. So first I was a little upset at this book, and then I adjusted to the new diet. And then I read it myself as a teenager, and I was just so impressed to find out that famine, which worried me, you know, famine worries children so much when you hear about other children hungry.
Yes, yes.
That famine was not caused by scarcity, that there's plenty of food for everyone. In the same way right now in the United States, there's plenty of housing.
Let me back up. But what the problem is with the food isn't that we don't produce it, it's that it's not distributed equitably.
Absolutely.
So go ahead. And the housing?
Same thing.
Really?
It's not distributed equitably. Housing is, in a sense, a physical manifestation of the huge gaps in society that we've created.
Between the haves and the have-nots?
Yeah, we have many people who have 2 or 3 houses, and we have many people living in cars. And with 10.4 million vacant houses, we have about 40 vacant housing units for every homeless person who's receiving any kind of service at all.
No, 40? So we have 40
We have
places
about 40
to live
places to live
for every homeless person.
for every homeless person who's receiving services. There's probably more homeless people than that.
But even at that,
But
even
even
if
at
you
that,
counted
even
everyone
if it were
that
20,
was homeless, my goodness.
even if we're 10.
We can all be housed. We can all be fed.
And that doesn't even account for the fact that our houses now are 2 to 3 to 4 times larger than they used to be.
So we can.
So we could be doubling up, turning
sure.
houses into apartments. There's a section in the book about families who've become freed from their mortgage and from a lot of their maintenance costs by dividing their house into 2 apartments, so they can rent out one
It's a
side.
wonderful, wonderful notion. I think that for many people, one of the things that spoke to me in the late 80s was the notion of financial independence, of not having to work. And one of the predicates of that idea that Joe Dominguez put out in the book, Your Money or Your Life, and Vicki Robin, was to indeed bring the necessary, get out of debt.
Absolutely.
And our mortgages in America tend to be the big debt.
That's absolutely right.
So a couple like this who take their house and create an apartment out of part of it, get some income, can pay down that debt quickly and achieve the
Absolutely.
freedom they want.
And it's an ecological choice because they're using less energy when they do that. And it's a social choice. Many people say, well, now that I have this apartment to rent out, I can have friends that I get to see every day. You know, without driving somewhere, without scheduling. Can we do lunch?
Yes.
3 weeks from now at 2 p.m. we'll meet, you know, for 1 hour. No, they have someone they can just walk over and say, hey, you want to come over for brunch tomorrow?
It's
Sweet.
Just knock on. Well, the picture I have of Europe is that Europe is designed far more that way. They didn't buy in, at least not until recently, buy into the suburbanization that America did.
It seems like that's true. And certainly one group of small house people are people who've lived overseas. And they come back and they say, we don't want this anymore. We were happy living in Copenhagen or Buenos Aires or something. And so they kind of remodel their life to fit a more urban lifestyle. Of course, all over the world, though, including in Europe, there are some people who were part of the big house movement, who were suburbanizing more and more, taking up more and more space, building larger and larger houses. But I think that's going to turn around because, well, we have global warming going on. We have fuel prices going up. We can't afford these houses. And that's a huge part of the small house movement, are just people looking at their utility bills and saying, I need a way out.
That's right.
I don't want to pay this utility bill anymore.
And having a smaller house, using less electricity or using less propane or natural gas or oil are really nice ways to just quickly reduce your costs.
Absolutely. In the early 20th century, when people were more concerned with costs, Ladies' Home Journal recommended that in Better Homes and Gardens. They said, make sure that the size of your house isn't too large. They would measure houses in cubic inches for volume, because it's really the volume that you're heating.
Right.
And they'd say, you know, make sure that people wanted lower ceilings, and many people wanted lower ceilings, so
Right.
their coal bill wouldn't be high. They'd do all the
I think,
computations.
we're starting to do similar things with our low carbon diet, looking at, okay, how many carbon emissions do you have in your lifestyle?
Absolutely.
Looking at the two big areas, your vehicle and your home, both the propane and the heating and the electricity both are big areas. I think we may start to be counting again, because it's planet-wide now, of course, with the climate change and
Absolutely, yeah.
incoming people.
People in the small house movement who are very serious about the ecological footprint and about equitable distribution of resources are interested in just using their fair share. And some people calculate that as little as about 120 square feet per person.
120 square feet, so that's a 10 by 12 room. Now, go vertical, right? You could have a loft. Or is that just? Maybe just
you
120
could probably
feet
debate it. You know, it's
That's-
pretty extreme, and they do these extensive footprint calculations. Of course, there's a story about a couple who did that in the book, and then they realized that they were living so far from their family, from their birth families, that just one trip home on an airplane was destroying.
All the savings they had done.
Yeah,
yes,
and so
that's
then they
right.
moved closer to their
That's
family.
right.
They decided, you know what, we've built this perfect cabin in the woods, but we're going to have to move across the country back home, because the truth is we want to be near our families. That's another part of the small house movement, are people who want their families to be closer. Either they want to live physically closer to their extended families, or some people with children believe that if you live closer to your children, you don't have the same problems that you might in a large house. One contractor moved his family into a much smaller house when his kids became teenagers, because he said, I want to eavesdrop on them. I want to know what's going on. I don't want to wake up one day and realize I don't know them.
We have friends that have 3 children that share one bedroom, who do not feel deprived. Now they have an extra room. They are all musicians. They all practice their music and study in the dining room. And it's like, I don't get any sense from any of those children, sort of this, I need my own. They find ways to create their space inwardly by not, and sharing the sound space, for example, who gets to do the piano now and the harp there and so on. And I came to realize this. I mean, I shared a room with my sister as a teenager. What is the problem here? So,
What a gift their parents are giving them to teach them how to get along with other people.
and I find that true with them, that their social development with their children, much more mature than other children. They're not stuck on they also don't have a television in their home.
Right.
So they literally learn how to converse, how to play, how to be with other people. So I
that's
think that the
beautiful.
small house movement can also help us re-socialize, if you will, or make social connections that have been lost, the loneliness we talked about earlier.
Yeah, we've had this myth that, oh, I just need some more time alone. I just need more space. We keep throwing the same thing. What is the expression? If you have a problem and you keep throwing the same solution at it,
We know, you have
well,
to
you're not.
change
You
the
have to change
level
what you're doing.
Where the
Perhaps-
level where we ask the question. And so when we
Exactly.
think about space, I think generally we first think about physical space instead of maybe a quieter inner space.
Psychic space.
And then we may not need all the outside physical material space.
That's right.
So we have 4 minutes left. What treasures haven't we covered?
Let's see. Well, you know, people who are listening are probably noticing that in their area there's a big change going on economically in the housing market. People are really seriously looking at, should they have bought so much space? How are they, we're really over-mortgaged as a country. And so it's just nice to know that there is a way out that's actually not deprivation, just like you said about the family. This isn't a path towards deprivation. It's just changing your perspective and realizing the richness of a way that was there all along, but that you didn't know was there and you didn't notice. That actually scaling down can really be ratcheting up your whole lifestyle.
Which of course goes counter to what the corporations have been advertising to us and promoting, be it in film or movie or advertising, like bigger, spacious, architectural digest, whatever.
It's important to always ask, where's the profit motive? And always remember.
Who benefits at this?
And then
Yes,
ask your
yes.
soul, what's good for my soul? Many times people who have a strong spiritual discipline. Many people who are Christians, who are dedicated Christians or from various religious groups, realize they don't need so much stuff. They don't need so much space because they have a relationship with a spiritual practice. Or people who are so connected to nature that they're going out and backpacking every weekend. They don't need a big house. They want to get out of that house and be in the world, because the world can be a very beautiful place when you're not dragged down by maintenance of stuff.
Yeah, I think that sense of burden that you're talking about, I think there's a lot of people who may not even realize what a weight that is.
Yeah, it's been a burden. It's been a burden. Ironically, maybe foreclosure for some people will be a lessening of
Yeah, and
of
it's
the
going to
burden.
invite creativity for all of us. Because that kind of self-examination, am I the sort of person that can live with other people? Would I want them in my house? What parts of my house? You know, what kinds of activities? Lots of things to think about. Would I share with another person? And one of the chapters in your book I have to add in this last minute here is about, for those who don't move to another space or even separate it, is just decluttering our houses and using them well, looking at what rooms do we truly use, so that even people who are going to stay where they are can perhaps be burdened less by what's there.
Burden less by what's there and realize that what they have is perfect already. That's always nice to discover that, oh, I have enough.
That's a magic word.
It's amazing.
Enough is a magic word.
It's the most ecological thing you can do is to, look around your house and say, it's okay. I don't have to add anything. I don't have to buy anything. I don't have to drive anywhere and get anything to put in this house. I can just sit here and love my house and love my family or love myself and just be happy.
I can't think of anything richer.
Isn't it?
Well, what a book that's talking about supposedly houses is really talking about inside home.
Yeah,
As well as
home.
outside home.
Creating that home inside yourself so that you're not grasping at more and more house. Because what we have now really is not a housing crisis, but we do have a homing crisis. Everyone wants more home.
Shay, thank you. This has been
Thank
a
you.
wonderful conversation.
I've enjoyed
Everyone
it.
wants more home. So my wish for viewers is, find where home is, where your heart is, and share it, or give it away, or do strengthen it, maybe. Thank you.
Thanks
for joining me.
Thank you very much.
You're watching Peak Moment, Community Responses for a Changing Energy Future. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Please join us next time.